Hello, my name is Jeff Polet. I am the director of the Ford Leadership Forum at the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Foundation in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and professor of political science emeritus at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. I'm going to be talking to you today about a German and Austrian philosopher by the name of Eric Voegelin. I have one of his books here. This is one of 34 volumes in his collected works. And you'll be happy to know I'm not going to talk to you about all 34 volumes. I'm going to be giving you a basic introduction to his work and arguing why he's significant and worth reading. By way of background, I want to talk a little bit about his upbringing. But before I do that, I want to do something a little unusual, and that is read a passage from Shakespeare's play Macbeth, because I think this will help set up a lot of the themes that we're going to be discussing in the next 35 or 40 minutes or so. This is the scene in Macbeth from Act 1, Scene 7, where Macbeth is contemplating the murder of King Duncan, and he has already told Lady Macbeth he's going to do this. And so now he's thinking about it, and he says this: "If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surcease success, that but this blow might be the be-all and end-all here. But here, upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. But in these cases we still have judgment here, that but we teach bloody instructions, which being taught, return to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of the poisoned chalice to our own lips. He's here in double trust, first as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed and then as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. And pity, like a newborn babe, stridling the blast, or heaven's cherubim horsed upon the sightless couriers of the air, shall blow the horrid deed in every eye, that tears shall drown the wind. I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other side." Now, there's a lot of themes here that I think are going to be helpful in understanding Eric Voegelin, and I'll be coming back to them over the course of this lecture, but one of them will be this idea of vaulting ambition or leaping itself. The other will be the idea of a man killing the king in order that he might become king himself. A third will be the idea of standing on the shoals of time and trying to get to the other bank. And finally, there will be the idea of a kind of judgment that takes place where Macbeth says his virtues will plead like angels trumpet-tongued, right? The trumpets of judgment, condemning Macbeth for the deed he is contemplating. All right, so what does this all have to do with Eric Voegelin? Eric Voegelin was born in Germany in 1901. And that date is significant for a couple of reasons. I want to suggest that the first reason why it's significant is because Voegelin is born 1 year after the death of the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. And in the background of a lot of Voegelin's thought is what happens with Nietzsche and how Nietzsche sort of brings to a close the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. What do I mean by that? Well, one thing I mean by that is the 19th century is committed to this idea of progress. and the idea that if human beings just apply their faculties and their abilities and their reasons to social problems, we will end with an increasingly perfect and a finally perfect society. Nietzsche sets aside that whole belief. He condemns that whole belief. He thinks that this is a false idol that we're creating. A second idea is this idea of scientific progress. That if we have the right sorts of scientific methods, again, we can solve all human problems. Nietzsche casts doubt upon the ability of science to solve all our problems. And the third thing that Nietzsche both brings to a close and in some sense fulfills is a very important theme in Voegelin's thought, and that's what we'll call the Promethean urge, which Voegelin identifies as a central impulse of 19th century philosophy that carries over into the 20th century. So for those of you who don't know, the story of Prometheus in ancient philosophy is that Prometheus steals fire from heaven and is punished by the gods. And his main crime is the founder of civilization. If you go to Rockefeller Center in New York City, you'll see a statue of Prometheus there carrying fire from heaven in Rockefeller Center. But his main crime, Prometheus says, is not just carrying fire and thus creating civilization, but his main crime is giving human beings hope. And in giving them hope, they have the possibility of aspiring beyond their mean estate, of aspiring beyond their condition. And the gods don't want that. They want the human beings to be subjugated, subservient, weak, helpless. And so they punish Prometheus for his crime by chaining him to a rock on a mountainside, and every day an eagle flies down from heaven and plucks his liver out. His liver grows back and he flies away. But Prometheus has a secret. He knows how the generation of the gods will end, and through which human race, through which human descendants, the gods will eventually be overthrown. The Olympian gods will eventually be overthrown. And so the gods send Hermes to Prometheus to get him to yield the secret. And Prometheus won't do so. And when Hermes asks him why, Prometheus says this: "In a word, I hate all the gods." Now that phrase reappears in the writings of Karl Marx in the early part of the 19th century. Marx is writing a work that actually comes out of his doctoral dissertation, and he starts talking about human desire. And he says in the preface to this work, "The creed of philosophy is and always has been the creed of Prometheus. In a word, I hate all the gods." What does Marx mean by this? Well, according to Voegelin, and I think this is a pretty reasonable interpretation of Marx, according to Voegelin, Marx is succumbing to the oldest of all human temptations. Going back to the Garden of Eden, what is the temptation the serpent presents to Adam and Eve? You shall be as God. Eat of the fruit, and you shall be like God. That's the oldest, the perennial, the primordial human temptation, to become gods ourselves. And in the 19th century, so in Aeschylus, when Aeschylus is giving us the tale of Prometheus, the chorus responds by saying, well, this is madness, nostos in Greek. This is madness to hate the gods and to try to be like the gods. But in the 19th century, the idea of becoming like the gods achieves a kind of fulfillment. Right? This is now endorsed as what human beings should properly want to be. So when Marx talks about this in his doctoral dissertation, he says, in a word, we hate all the gods, what he's saying is that humans and gods are rivals to one another. And what is required is the destruction of the gods. If you're interested in art or in music, if you want to, if you got 16 hours to kill, you might want to listen to Wagner's Ring Cycle, because that's one of the main themes in the Ring Cycle, the destruction of the gods and the elevation of human beings in the place of the gods. This becomes a theme that is reflected upon by Nietzsche in his work. And so what he argues in a lot of his great works is that what has happened is, in Western morality, we have tried to maintain the moral system that arose out of belief in the gods, and he's specifically thinking about Christianity there. Right, so all our moral ideas emerge out of Christianity, but what we're trying to do is destroy the God of Christianity. So Nietzsche puts it this way. We have tried to maintain biblical morality without biblical faith. And in Nietzsche's thinking, that was an impossible task. That wasn't going to happen. So the foundation of biblical faith, once that was taken away, the whole edifice that was built on it was going to collapse also. And so in one of his works, Nietzsche talks about this monstrous logic of terror, this collapse that's about to come in Western civilization, because we have removed the foundation of belief in a transcendent God. And Nietzsche says, okay, so once all that morality is gone, we have to create a new morality. And we'll create a new morality based upon this promise that we have become gods ourselves. So in his work, Zarathustra, thus spake Zarathustra, Zarathustra says to his disciples at one point, O my disciples, ye have guessed the secret of my soul. If there were gods, how could I stand not being one? So this is the story at the story at the beginning of the 19th century is this promise. If we become gods ourselves, we will make the world a better place. We can create a perfect world. And Nietzsche, at the end of the 19th century, exposes that dream as a lie and says, no, that whole system of morality is going to collapse along with it. And it's going to be catastrophic. So Voegelin is born in 1901. And just as Nietzsche expires and his shadow is now cast over Europe, Voegelin is born, and 12, 13 years later, what does he see? He sees the First World War. And like a lot of European thinkers at that time, for Voegelin, the First World War is the fulfillment of Nietzsche's prophecy. That once this foundation is removed, the whole civilization that's built on that foundation is going to collapse. And so a number of thinkers in the late 1910s and early 1920s are addressing this issue of civilizational collapse. It's in Freud, it's in Weber, and it's certainly in thinkers like Voegelin. And what's important about this, in part, is a realization that the civilizational collapse represented by the bloody battlefields of the First World War is an outgrowth of a spiritual collapse. So this becomes now a central idea for Voegelin, and that is the idea that political disorder ultimately results from spiritual disorder. And so you can't solve your political problems by just looking at political devices and voting and rule of law and these sorts of things. You have to address the underlying spiritual crisis. And that becomes Voegelin's life work. How do we address this underlying spiritual crisis that has resulted in the collapse of this civilization? I mentioned that Freud and Weber and some of these thinkers are doing something similar to that. But they are no longer on the scene when the second great event happens. The First World War is in some ways the first great event that happens in Voegelin's life. The second important event that happens in Voegelin's life is the formation of the Weimar Republic in Germany, the collapse of the Weimar Republic, and the rise of Nazi totalitarianism. And not only Nazi totalitarianism, but communist totalitarianism also. And this becomes, again, a sort of focus of his life work, to understand the age that he lives in and how these totalitarian systems of government came to be, and how the underlying ideologies that informed these totalitarian systems got a hold of people, how they became existentially compelling to people. So he's living in, he actually travels to the United States in the 1920s, comes back, he's living in Austria, and in the late 1920s and early 1930s, he begins to see something happening. So keep in mind that the Nazis come to power in Germany in January of 1933. Already in 1930, and then again in 1932, Voegelin is writing books critical of the Nazis. Now, this is before they come to power, and when they do come to power, a lot of people in the Western democracies are fine with the Nazis. They don't think there's a problem here. They don't see the problem. It's not until 6, 7 years later that they begin to think to themselves, uh-oh, we have a problem here. There are a couple of thinkers and writers who, in the early 1930s, before the Nazis even come to power, are looking at that and saying, there's something not right here. This is going to be a problem. So in 1932, Voegelin writes a book called On the Race Idea, which is very critical of National Socialist teachings about race and other sorts of teachings about racial identity and race essentialism. The Nazis come to power in January of 1933, but in Germany. Voegelin's in Austria. But this is interesting to him because what has happened is you have the formation of a democratic regime during the Weimar period in Germany. And what happens is in the late 20s and in the early 30s, the government of Weimar is fine in a certain sense, right? You have a good constitution, you have a solid constitution in place, and you have a government that's operating, and they're doing everything by the rule. You have the rule of law. But what you have is an incredibly decadent society. You know, Voegelin is going to write later that it's foolish to believe that you can have a leadership class in society that emerges out of a corrupted populace. And that they're somehow going to be able to lead a populace who themselves are the source of the corruption. And that's his experience in Weimar. He's looking at what's going on in Germany, and he says, it's decadent. If you want to see an example of this, watch the musical Cabaret, which is a sort of exploration of this deepening decadence of Weimar society. Because what happens? Right? People become more libertine. They become sexual libertines. They become drug and alcohol libertines. They become hedonists in every way. And so you have a collapse of the order of the soul that takes place. And this becomes a widespread social crisis. And so for thinkers like Voegelin, such as Voegelin, Hannah Arendt, Hans-Georg Gadamer, Leo Strauss, who are all living in Germany or Austria during this period, and they see the collapse of the Weimar Republic and the rise of tyranny. What does this remind them of? It reminds them of Book 8 of Plato's Republic, because this is exactly what Plato predicts in Book 8 of the Republic, that a democratic society will have a loss and an erosion of authority. It will result in this kind of libertine conduct, the lotus eaters, right, who try to immunize themselves against the pains and displeasures of existence. They narcoticize themselves. They become consumed with amusement. They become obsessed with pleasure. And what you'll have, Plato argued in Book 8 of the Republic, is complete disorder. And when you have complete chaos and disorder like that, somebody's going to have to come along and impose order. And that will be the tyrant. That's what the tyrant does. He imposes order among all the disorder. And so for Voegelin, as these other thinkers, when they see what happened in Weimar Germany, and they see the rise of National Socialism and the messianic figure, in this case Hitler, or in China it's Mao, or in the Soviet Union it's Lenin and then Stalin, the messianic figure, Mussolini in Italy, who's going to restore order and restore the promise of the nation. The appeal of that becomes overwhelming to people. The messianic leader. Again, I'll give you an example of this. Leni Riefenstahl's film of the Nuremberg rallies. And she films Hitler going to Nuremberg and leading the people in the rallies. And it's a piece of propaganda, but it is a really telling example of how the kind of totalitarian mindset works. People come to feel their insignificance, their helplessness, their powerlessness. And so Riefenstahl at the beginning of the movie has Hitler's plane descend from the skies, Wagner's playing in the background. And it's casting a cross upon the German countryside. And he comes out and he's met by the throngs of people. And, you know, she shows his hand kind of holding, you know, the Sieg Heil, and his hand is kind of holding the German people, and it's healing. Right? He's healing the broken nation. So the whole theme of the movie is that he's a political messiah, and he's going to save people. And so for Voegelin now, this becomes, again, an overwhelming theme in his political analysis, that when you have chaos and disorder, the temptation toward a kind of messianism, a salvation from the chaos and the disorder, and the need for this kind of charismatic, healing figure to save us from the disorder will be overwhelming. And that's an essential part of the ideological temptation. So these two supportive ideas, political totalitarianism and the ideologies that support them, become for Voegelin a central part of his work that he does in the 34 volumes of this book. All right, so what are the kind of basic elements of his thought? A couple of things I want to draw your attention to. First of all is this idea that I've talked about disorder and chaos. We can only know what disorder and chaos are if we have some sort of intimation or idea of what order is. You don't know what bad order is unless you have an idea of what good order is. So where does this idea of good order come from? We have plenty of examples of bad order. We don't have that many examples of good order, and we don't have that many examples of good order that gets sustained. And not all examples of good order are transferable. We've learned that here in the United States in the last 20 years, that our ideas of what constitutes good political order don't transfer well to other contexts. So what's happening? We're engaged in a search for order. This is a central idea to Voegelin, this idea of the search. So what are the elements of the search? Well, there are 4 elements involved in a search, and I'm going to tell you what they are, and then we'll go through them one by one. There's an object of the search, the thing being searched for. There is the subject of the search, that which is doing, or that who is doing the searching. There are the means of the search, how you go about, how the searcher goes about trying to learn about the object, trying to discern the object. And then there are the mistakes, the derailments, the places where the search goes wrong. These are the 4 main elements that Voegelin draws our attention to. So first, the object of the search. What is the object of the search? We experience reality in terms of bits and pieces. I'm here in Louisville right now. I came down here from Grand Rapids. I drove through Indianapolis. All these are little parts of a larger whole. And that's how we experience the world, as little parts of a larger whole. But the parts only have significance in terms of their place within the whole. And so what we're trying to do is come to some sort of knowledge of the whole. And that's a problem for us because we have no direct perception of it. We can only know the whole through its parts, and we can only understand the parts in terms of their context within the whole. And this is the hermeneutical circle. This is the sort of problem that we're constantly dealing with. But what we want ultimately is some sort of knowledge of the whole. And as I said, that's a problem for us because we can't perceive it. It's not a direct object of experience. And that's why we're searching for it. If we had an experience of the whole, if we had a full experience of truth, if we had a full experience of justice, if we had a full experience of what is good, we wouldn't be searching for those things. You don't search for things you have. You search for things you don't have. My phone went up. You don't search for things you have. You search for things you don't have. We don't have the truth. We don't have justice. And that's why we're searching for those things. But we're able to search for those things because the whole, what Voegelin will often call the transcendent, that which transcends our historical world, that which transcends our historical context, exercises a kind of pull on us. It draws us to itself. Why are we interested in justice? Because when we are experiencing injustice, there's something in us that's being pulled, is being drawn in some way that says, this isn't right. Whatever is going on in this immediate context, there's something not right about that. So how are we able to recognize that? How do we know there's something not right about that? Well, that's the search. Those are the kinds of questions that trigger the search. If you read Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail, that's exactly what he's doing in that letter. Right? In the middle of the injustice, he's saying, okay, so what is it in me that's responding to something outside of me, that transcends me, that transcends this historical context, that transcends Jim Crow laws, that's higher than all these things. And because it's higher than, it's pulling everyone from all these different directions. Right? It's the threat, it's the locus of all these different threads that pulls things to itself. So you have this desire for order, for the good, the true, the beautiful, the just, that exercises a consistent pull on us and provides for us a sense of meaning and purpose to our lives. We know that somehow getting deeper and deeper into this will make our lives more good, more true, more beautiful. All right, so the object of the search, the person doing the searching, what's being involved there? The searcher is responding to this pull. They sense the object of the search. It's making a claim on them somehow. And they feel this pull from beyond themselves, and they're responding to that pull. And they're responding to that pull essentially by asking questions. What is this? And they might ask questions about their own lives. I mean, we're all engaged in asking fundamental questions about our own lives. Who am I? Where did I come from? What is to become of me? What is expected of me while I'm here? These are fundamental questions we all ask at one point or another. And so the question is a kind of opening up in the whole itself. And the most important question, in a certain sense, that we have as human beings, and this is something Voegelin gets again from Plato, is this question about our own death. We know, I mean, we try to deny it, we try to avoid it, we try not to think about it, but at a certain point, an awareness of our own death is a deep wound, right? It's a kind of cut into our being. And it raises all these troubling questions for us. This is why Socrates would call philosophy the art of dying. Because the awareness of our own mortality, the awareness of our own finitude, makes us ask these questions about who we are and what's expected of us and how we're supposed to spend our time here and what it all means and what the purpose of it is. To raise those questions is not to despair. It's to suggest the possibility of an answer. Maybe in the process of searching, we can learn something about the answers to those questions. So the searcher is responding to the pull. How do we do this? The means of the search. We do this through dialogue, talking with others, and talking not only with others in our present world, but talking with people in the past. And what happens in dialogue is we have these moments of illumination. So imagine that you're in a dark room and somebody is asking you to describe this dark room to them, and you're like, well, I can't see anything. It's darkness. But you have a flashlight. Now, your flashlight will not illuminate the whole room at once. It will only illuminate parts of it. And in a certain sense, that's what Voegelin means by what we're doing when we're engaged in this search, is we're looking for illumination. We're in this whole thing called reality, and we're trying to illuminate it in some fashion, but we can only illuminate it a little bit at a time. And furthermore, not everybody is capable of illuminating. So we shine a light here, and we describe what we see. And it's true. It's a partial truth. It's not the whole truth, but it's a partial truth. And then we shine it here, and we describe what we see. But we're also remembering what we have already seen. And so for Voegelin, that's part of the whole historical process, is that we're engaged in this constant act of human remembering. What have we already seen? How has it filled out the picture? Is it an accurate picture? One of the things that he likes talking about is the difference between what he calls an open soul and a closed soul. So an open soul is a person who wants to have reality illuminated, right? And they're seeking more and more illumination. A closed soul is opposed to such illumination. I'll explain why in a minute. They're opposed to such illumination. They don't want to know the truth about reality. And the main reason they don't want to know the truth about reality is because it's going to require something of them. All right, so the open soul will seek further illumination, and they'll find their illumination wherever they can. So one of the things he'll talk about is over time, our understanding of reality has been illuminated, and the term he uses for this is differentiated. Something about the world around us and something about our own consciousness, our own way of thinking, has been changed. It's been improved upon. It's been differentiated in some fashion. So a couple of quick examples of how you might want to think about this. I'm willing to wager that nobody who's listening to this lecture worships the Olympian deities. I'm also willing to wager that they don't worship cosmic deities, like gods who are part of the world around us. Why? Well, because Voegelin says when the Israelite and the Christian differentiations happen, and the main differentiation is this idea that God is not in the cosmos, but God is outside the cosmos. God is both the beginning and the beyond. And once they become aware of that, it's not possible anymore to think about God in an intracosmic way, or to think about God in a polytheistic way, many gods. It would be an error it would be a falsehood to go back to that. So that's an illumination, a differentiation, this idea that God is both the beginning and the beyond. God is transcendent. God has caused the universe, but God is not part of the universe. Another example that might be helpful is to think about something like music, and to think about a very simple tune. And then to take that tune and start developing it, right, and differentiating it. So what does Beethoven do in his Third Symphony? He takes 2 E-flat chords, boom, 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 and he creates this whole symphonic world out of them. What does Bach do in The Art of the Fugue? He takes this very simple tune and he creates this whole musical world out of it. He's taken something very compact, very undifferentiated, right, 1 chord, and he has now developed it and differentiated it, and he's made it its fullest possible revelation of itself. So that's kind of how this idea of differentiation works. The problem that we have, Voegelin argues, is we derail our insights. So Plato writes, Aristotle writes, right, and they give us new insights into reality. They have illuminated reality in some fashion. But we derail these things, and there are different ways that we derail these things. One way we can get off course is by treating their illuminations, their insights, as if it's doctrine. And that all you have to do is repeat the doctrine, and you'll have the truth about reality. Reality is not static, Voegelin argues. It can't be captured in that way. We're not just taking snapshots. It's a kind of living, ongoing process. And the problem with turning things into a doctrine is that you just turn it into a kind of teaching about things. But what you have done is you've lost what Voegelin calls the engendering experience. And that is, as human beings, we are in the world and we're experiencing the world. And we are symbolizing our experiences in art or in language. Like we're taking our experiences and we're figuring out how to communicate them in some fashion. Right? So Mahler in his First Symphony and his Fifth Symphony and his Ninth Symphony, all his symphonies really, what's he doing? He's taking the experience of death and he's turning it into music. He's symbolizing it in music. In her short stories, Flannery O'Connor is taking the experience of evil and she's symbolizing it in a story. This is what we do. We have these experiences of things and we symbolize them so that we can communicate them to others. But the symbol is not the experience. So for Voegelin, what we have to do is take all these articulations, language, art, and so forth, and trace it back to its original experience. What was it that the philosopher was experiencing? What was it that the artist was experiencing? And that is something that we can experience also. If you listen to a Mahler symphony, in a certain sense, you're re-experiencing what Mahler experienced when he wrote that symphony. If you read Plato, you're re-experiencing what Plato experienced when he wrote the Republic or whatever, any of the dialogues. Now, the obvious question is, why is it that people will derail? Why is it that they will lose the engineering experience? Why will they lose love of the whole? Why will they lose love of the truth? Voegelin spends a lot of time on that question, just kind of pondering it and thinking about it. Like, why would people do this? And maybe the best way to formulate it is this. People don't like uncertainty. And so Voegelin writes at one point, people will always prefer a certain untruth to an uncertain truth. Uncertainty brings anxiety, conflict, disagreement, confusion. We don't like uncertainty. We like certainty. Right? Gets rid of all conflict. If we are certain about what the truth is, eliminates all disagreement, eliminates all conflict, eliminates all anxiety. And that's what we're trying to avoid more than anything. And so we will always prefer, Voegelin says, we'll always prefer certain untruths to uncertain truths. And the problem, he says, in part, is that we live in a Christian world, or at least in a civilization that was bequeathed to us by Christianity. And uncertainty is the essence of Christianity. What did thinkers achieve by their fallacious construction? On this point, there is no doubt. They achieved a certainty about the meaning of history and about their own place in it, which otherwise they would not have had. This is the ideologues. Certainties now are in demand for the purpose of overcoming uncertainties with their accompaniment of anxiety. And the next question then would be, what specific uncertainty was so disturbing that it had to be overcome by the dubious means, forgive me for this term, of fallacious immanentization? In other words, what he's talking about there is people take the perfection of the Christian afterlife and they bring it into the world here and now. They don't want to delay the perfection of the Christian afterlife. They want, and the justice and the fairness and the unity of the Christian, they want that in the here and now. And so that's what he means by immanentization. And by fallacious, he means it can't be done. One does not have to look far afield for an answer. Uncertainty is the very essence of Christianity. The feeling of security in a world full of gods is lost with the gods themselves, the intracosmic deities. When the world is de-divinized, communication with the world-transcendent God is reduced to the tenuous bond of faith, in the sense of Hebrews 11, verse 1, as the substance of things hoped for and the proof of things unseen. Ontologically, the substance of things hoped for is nowhere to be found but in faith itself. And epistemologically, there is no proof for things unseen, but again, this very faith. The bond is tenuous indeed, and it may snap easily. The life of the soul in openness toward God, the waiting, the periods of aridity and dullness, guilt and despondency, contrition and repentance, forsakenness and hope against hope, the silent stirrings of love and grace, trembling on the verge of a certainty that if gained is loss, the very lightness of this fabric may prove too heavy a burden for men who lust for massively possessive experience. The main problem Voegelin identifies in the modern world is all of this idea about ideologies and totalitarianism are captured in his analysis of Gnosticism. Gnosticism is an ancient heresy, an ancient religion that infected Christianity very early on and was rejected by the church. The main Gnostic temptation is to see the world as an inherently bad place, that we were kind of cast into this world against our wills by some kind of evil deity. And we're being punished by existence itself. Our very existence is a kind of mode of punishment because the world is a prison house and our souls are kind of captured in it. So what are the elements of Gnosticism? And I think you'll see how this plays out in Voegelin's political analysis. First of all, there's some kind of dissatisfaction with our condition. The oppression of workers by owners. The unsavoriness of life in an industrial and in a post-industrial era. The pervasiveness of racism, the pervasiveness of sexism. Right? Now, the idea comes out of a genuine experience, right? If one group is being treated unfairly, we're going to be unhappy with that condition. It's the second part of the Gnostic impulse that Voegelin objects to, and that is to see the problem as baked into the nature of things. that it's a problem with reality itself. The world has been badly ordered. The world has been badly made. So we are placed against our wills in a world that is badly made. However, third part of Gnosticism, salvation in that world and from that world is possible. And so that's what we're seeking, is some kind of mode of salvation. So you'll see how in these ideologies, they'll often use this kind of language of salvation. In modern racial politics, for example, this language of purity and stain is everywhere. This idea of salvation is everywhere. Confession, absolution. The fourth part of the Gnostic temptation is that because the world is badly made, and we are in it against our will, but we seek salvation from this badly made world, that salvation can be accomplished by transforming reality somehow. We have to redo the world. We have to rebuild the world. We can transform it. And a lot of times for ideologues, it will be, if we can just do one thing. So if we could just change human nature. This is what the American progressives argue. If we could just change human nature. Or if we could, for Marx, if we could just eliminate private property. Or for Hitler and More's Utopia, if we could just eliminate greed, right? There's always like this little secret key. If we could just do this, then we could solve all these problems, and they would magically melt away. So they always have like this secret solution. Being is transformed, and mainly what you've done is you've eliminated the problem of evil, the brokenness of the world. That's what they always want. They want to eliminate the problem of evil, instead of seeing it as just a pervasive part of the nature of reality itself. Salvation is possible, and you will get a transformation of being itself, just the way in Christian eschatology, at the end times, the crooked shall be made straight, the part shall be made whole again. Right? We shall adorn ourselves with laughter and joy. Sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Right? That's the vision. But we bring the vision into the world here and now instead of upon Christ's return. It's in the here and now. And it's done by human action. Instead of waiting for God to take care of this, we're going to take care of it ourselves. We'll fix the world. God bungled it, we'll redo it. We'll make it. That's the totalitarian temptation, according to Voegelin, is this idea of remaking the world in our own image. And there's a secret knowledge, or a secret formula. That's gnosis, right? This knowledge. Right? So you have this kind of secret formula or knowledge about how this can be accomplished. And usually there's a cadre of elites who are the possessors of this secret knowledge. And of course, their job is to rule and to eliminate anything that might stand in the way of the transformation of reality, of this redoing of being. And so this is what Voegelin means by the Gnostic temptation and why totalitarianism is so vicious. You're trying to transform reality itself. Rather than be a participant within reality, you're trying to transform that reality because you fundamentally hate it. Somebody who is a participant within reality fundamentally loves it. Somebody who's trying to transform reality fundamentally hates it. Okay. Finally, what's the significance of Voegelin? I think one thing is his analysis of the crisis of modernity that we are still very much living in right now. I think you see, the more you read Voegelin, the more you see the continuing relevance of it. The world is, in some sense, divided between two types of people, according to Voegelin. Those who seek attunement to the world, those who seek attunement to reality, Right? They're trying to be in tune, in harmony with the cosmos, in harmony with the order of things, in harmony with the divine plan, and in harmony with the law. They try to attune themselves to that. Right? They subordinate themselves to it. They love it. Versus those who are not attuned. They are disharmonic. And they try to dominate the world, and they try to dominate others. If human beings are going to be stubborn and uncooperative, we will change them. We will force them to be something other than what they are. So attunement, love of the world versus what the great French philosopher Albert Camus called despair. Despair at the world and despair at being human. His analysis of totalitarianism and ideology is without rival among conservative writers and conservative thinkers. His understanding of history and these kind of derailments of the Christian story that have taken place, right? And understanding that modern ideologies such as Marxism and Hegelianism and Nietzscheanism are retellings of the Christian story, but perverse retellings of the Christian story. His understanding of the role of tragedy and irony in history. His attunement to the order of things. And finally, I want to suggest that one of the things that ought to interest you about Eric Voegelin is that in many ways he operates as a kind of model for how we should think. Openness to a reality outside ourselves. Intellectual honesty, a refusal to say things we don't believe. A willingness to correct ourselves when we know we're wrong. Voegelin wrote a 7-volume history of political ideas, and he got to the 7th volume and he thought, my whole project was wrong, and he never published it in his lifetime. Because he thought, no, the originating, animating idea was wrong. I'm going to trash that whole thing. I'm going to start all over again. 7 volumes, right? A decade of work, a decade plus of work. He just taught intellectual honesty, a desire for clarity, right? To get as much illumination as you possibly can. Courage. Right? An unwillingness to say things you don't believe to be true, and a willingness to say things you do believe to be true, regardless of the consequences. Voegelin had to flee for his life. After the Anschluss of Austria in 1938, in the middle of the night, he and his wife escaped Vienna, made their way through the Swiss Alps and ultimately to North America. He literally risked his life writing the things that he wrote in the 1930s. And finally, I think one of the more interesting things Voegelin ever said is, none of us are obligated to participate in the disorder of the age. None of us are obligated to participate in the disorder of the age. In fact, we are obligated not to participate in disorder. If we know something's wrong, if we know it is disordered, if we know that it's all based on a lie, or it's based upon the desire to dominate, or it's based upon power and power alone, we have an obligation not to participate, to stand alone, and to have the courage of our convictions. Thank you.